Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of ND and ABA with Martin and Dan. I'm your host, Martin. Alongside of me is my co-host, Dan. And Dan, I'm going to be honest, I'm excited about this episode. I know we're not going to be talking about ABA and everything, but quite frankly, this is kind of one of my special interests that I wanted to talk about. And so yeah, it's great to be here. We had a couple weeks break, I know, but I had a reason for it. I want to admit, a lot of great reasons, and it's great to be back on with our wonderful guest, Brice.
Welcome, Brice. And yeah, great to be back as well, Martin. Some of you guys might remember Brice from last season when we came on with the Psychobabble BCBAs.
Yeah, so if you're listening, you wouldn't be able to tell, but if you watched the video last time, I had pink hair and now I have black hair, appropriate for Halloween.
Oh, yeah.
Really just kind of moving along, enjoying life. I got a couple new rats. I'll always talk about my rats. And I'm really happy to announce that I did get a promotion to a senior analyst and training coordinator. And it's been really fun to kind of jump into a different route, in my career as an analyst.
Wow, congratulations on both the rats and the promotion. And you know what? I was wondering, I always think about your rats in like this odd Skinnerian context where I think, oh, if only Skinner had an assent-based model of studying his rats and he could really, honor their dignity. And then I imagine your rats, they have a high degree of dignity in their environment at your home. Is that right?
Yes, they do. I definitely do not force them. Okay, well, that would be a lie. Sometimes I force kisses, but if they let me know they do not want kisses, then I try my best to respect their boundaries.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Scent-based kisses for all the pet rat owners out there and all the rodent lovers. Again, it's a very special episode. I want to take a quick moment before we dive into the psychology to congratulate Martin. He's won some very special awards, medals, and recognitions since we've last spoken. Martin, do you want to fill us in as well?
So this award was one of the more difficult awards to win. I found out that before it was chosen, they said that this was the most nominations that they have received in 26 years of doing these awards. And, it's great to see so many advocates finally stepping out and really doing the best that they can.
Yeah, well, you know what? I think that the Advocate of the Year award is much well deserved in San Andreas, and absolutely all the nominees, congratulations to them. But to be nominated so many times, it must just feel, overwhelmingly supportive. I hope you know that, you've inspired so many people beyond the amount who nominated you for this award alone. But just by receiving it, even more people, right, get to see what you have done for the autism community of the Bay Area, as well as the United States and even the world.
And then before that, I ended up winning gold in flag football for state championships. And with that, I found out we were put in a lottery system. And if we are chosen, then we will be flying, or our team will be flying to Minnesota to participate in the USA Games in a couple years. So hopefully, and then not only that, but with the awards, it came with not two. So State Assembly, State Senate, Dave Cortese, who I've collaborated with in the past, but also one of the other people that actually won an award yesterday, Joe Samidian, who is part of the supervisors or county supervisors. And honestly, it was a very whirlwind day. I didn't think I would win such an incredible award, and I totally didn't expect 3 recognitions from 3 of the top people here in the state of California.
Wow, that's so amazing. And yes,
Thank
round
you.
of applause for you, Martin.
Thank
For
you.
those who don't know, Martin, he's not only an author, an advocate, a Special Olympics athlete, and gold medalist, but his advocacy also knows no bounds. He's gone all the way to Dubai. He's gone in this month alone, I think, to Ohio.
Yeah,
And
first time doing a solo trip too. It was my
yeah,
first ever solo trip.
he's gone
So I
all
stepped
over.
way out of my comfort zone for that, but I know we are going to get close, or we're going to get to the questions very soon, but I totally forgot to bring up this one part. I was chosen to speak at this autism summit in Ohio, and I was nervous. I will admit the anxiety almost had me quit and kind of back out last minute, but I'm glad I stayed, and I asked people to break the ice because the slides didn't work for me. And so luckily I had it in a speech form, but I asked people why they specifically chose my talk, and they said, or some of them said, they didn't accept themselves for who they were, and they wanted to hear from others like ways to help increase their self-acceptance. And some were too emotional to talk, which was totally okay. And the biggest one was, it really inspired them to know that somebody's finally starting to talk about self-acceptance. So it was honestly an amazing trip, and I'm just still to this day trying to wrap my head around it.
All these things are just so well deserved. And I think, if it's a surprise to you, Martin, I've been saying it all along, it doesn't come as a surprise to me at all that you would
Yeah.
as this advocate of the year.
I'm
Because
trying to stay humble. That's the thing too. It's like, yeah, it's great and there's still a lot of work to do, but I'm trying to give time for myself to like really, really reflect on everything.
oh yeah, and you know what? We all should, and I think that's a good note to start us in on our conversation today. Taking
Yeah,
a moment to reflect on ourselves. We as behavior therapists and clinicians and analysts all experience a little bit of doubt sometimes, and maybe even some set of imposter syndrome when it comes
right.
to dealing with um, clinical diagnoses that we aren't familiar with in our field of study. For those who don't know what the education requirement is to be a behavior analyst, there is, a education or psychology related prerequisite, and then you go on to learn a very specific discipline that involves special education law, data collection, ethical
Right.
compliance, and all sorts of ABA specific things, which doesn't necessarily include psychological treatment. And if you do have a psychology based education, then you have the knowledge to accompany that. But a lot of us do not. I myself have a bachelor's in psychology, but compared to a clinical psychologist, my knowledge of the treatment for many diagnoses is very small. And I'm sure that we all find ourselves feeling this way. Who am I to advise on such things when all I know is ABA? And well, yes, you're right. All you know is ABA. Technically, that's your scope of practice, but you have your lived experience to accompany that. And a
Right.
lot of people, right? And I think all 3 of us can empathize with using our lived experience in practice and having much success in empathizing with students and learners and consumers of therapy. But even ourselves, right? We need a moment to breathe sometimes, right? And we might need to allocate resources either through
Yeah.
our own insurance or our employer, through our benefits that may include therapy and psychological resources that are there for us as well. So I know that was a lot, but in order to kind of dive in here, I'm
Yeah.
wondering if you could maybe tell us, Brice, how you feel maybe therapists could do a little bit better to understand um, people in a person-centered approach as a way of treating them that goes beyond just their diagnosis and the diagnostic criteria that is listed in the DSM-5.
No, that's a really great question. I think it's no different than how we approach building rapport with, our learners and clients. That's really important, first and foremost. If you are going to go have a counselor or a therapist or whatever you need, is having that sense of rapport. And oftentimes you do, I strongly believe, and I could be wrong, the people who have had poor experiences, whether they have a diagnosis of something or not, if they do have a poor experience with a counselor, it's because they didn't quite build rapport and they haven't found that right person just yet. Not every counselor you meet is going to be the right counselor either. Maybe you have to build a good rapport with them. But that all goes back to also, on the counselor's end, building that sense of rapport and really looking at the individual for who they are as a unique person in the world, because having a diagnosis helps this person maybe better understand how, they act and behave. However, if you just attribute them to the DSM-5 criteria, you're taking away their uniqueness and their individuality, and that's not really going to help them at all because you're going to be approaching them from a very box area, and you're not going to be able to really understand the person. So long-winded, but being able to build rapport and understand the individual, I think, is really important.
That definitely is. And yeah, and I wanted really quickly with this next question, because you're talking about rapport, and it is so important at the beginning that rapport with that client is amazing. I know there's some people who try to build a rapport that doesn't work out, and that's totally okay. So my question to you, as we build off on that, how can therapists build that trust and rapport with the autistic clients, or those that have some of them may have communication challenges, or some looking for psychology have nonverbal communication. And so what can be some way you think that these psychologists can build that rapport?
I mean, now that my brain thinks the behavior analyst way, I'm going to take some of these behavior analyst ideas just because I think I would have had a different answer had I not now have all the ABA background in my brain. But hopefully it's not a bad one. As you were talking, my brain was going, and I was just thinking if there was a preference assessment of sorts, or even just some sort of pre-communication before the person is sitting down in your chair, or you're talking to them through a computer screen, whatever modality the person is choosing to receive therapeutic services in that way. If you could just get a very brief questionnaire to kind of learn what their what their goals are, why are they coming to talk to you, are they able to speak verbally, what's their method of communication, just kind of some background information on that person, and maybe some sort of preference assessment molded to counseling and psychotherapy. At least that's where my brain goes. But I also think if you are in the field of psychology, our whole job is to be flexible as well. And so I kind of think that somebody would have to have a sense of flexibility and being able to adapt their style of approaching things to best fit the individual's needs.
Totally. And I'm so glad you brought that up because, right, although I did mention, right, we are sometimes, limited in our scope of practice. One of the things that we have a lot of experience with as behavior analysts and clinicians is assessing the preference of the person we're engaging with, whether they're even our learner or not. In all interactions, sometimes I feel like I am trying to figure out what's going to be the preferred mode to contact a person, what's going to be the preferred way or speed or language to talk in. And, sometimes it can be unconscious, sometimes it can be conscious, right? But we really want to sometimes lean on our common interests with a person when we're building this relationship, whether we're behavior analysts or we're just people engaging out in public or socializing. If I bump into you on Halloween out here in Oahu, I'm gonna say, maybe something about Waikiki and be like, oh, I like this area. Yeah, it's so much fun around this time of year, or something like that, right? Because I want to draw a connection. Oh, we might both live here, or we're both here, at least right now. We have a common situation. And sometimes that's all we have to build on. But when we're working with kids, what do we do is we think about our childhood and what affected us, right? And so a lot of people, right, they're really great with working with kids. And when it gets to people who might be their own age or older, I have this problem all the time as sort of a young BCBA. We feel like, okay, now we're really more outside of our scope of practice than we normally would be. And we kind of have to lean on the outside providers, the outside people who know this person to fill us in on all the things that really affect them as somebody who's experienced things that we actually have never been engaged in our entire life, right? So how do we build common examples when there are none? This is my long way of saying it's important to learn what this person likes and sometimes actually go the extra mile to learn all about that thing, figure it all out. I mean, I know so much about Digimon, Pokemon, Dragon Ball Z, all the Transformers, all the Power Rangers, all the Paw Patrol guys that I would never know, right? And that's not something they tested me on the BCB exam for at all. No, but I had to learn that stuff. I tell you, it was direly important for the ascent of my students, so they would want to engage in treatment, and also for myself to have fun, right? So never take that for granted, right? You're bringing your common interests in there to build rapport, yes, but what you're also doing is you're going to reinforce your own behavior by engaging with that client, that person who needs you, and that's going to create a much more valuable therapy relationship, much more reliable form of treatment than you would otherwise see in a model that, let's say, doesn't take into account the interest as much as just the psychological diagnosis, the medication, the treatment regimen, and the therapy schedule, right? We say one size, does not fit all, and sometimes, some things are only for some people, and they're not for everyone. It doesn't even necessarily mean there's a size for everyone, but we're going to try our best to learn, what makes things work for this person and what size that they'd like to be, right? What size they'd like their treatment to be. Let me rephrase that, right? And how much can they engage until, of course, it doesn't feel like it's fostering security, right? And of course, avoiding that as well. So, Martin, I know that was a lot, but I'm wondering how maybe you think that therapists can better build trust and rapport, and as well as find those special interests in common with their students.
I'd love to know that as well. And I'm going to be honest, because I've tried therapy in the past, and because most of the psychologists I've met with didn't really understand autism in general, it was hard to make a connection. And so, which brings me to my next question. I don't know if this is a good question to ask, but Brice, what do you think, or how do you think therapists can better integrate the autistic person's special interest into the therapy sessions? Because rapport building is super important, but it's like, with most of these psychologists, especially here in California, it's hard to find one that really understands autism and can really help us be more open in talking to others, and it's like, I don't know what that's like in Colorado, but it would be nice to potentially know for sure.
You know, I was thinking, I don't think I fully understood, and obviously every person is different, and I have more to learn about autism always, always. I don't think
Mhm,
I fully understood exactly what it was like, and I never will because I don't have autism myself.
mhm.
But I don't think I had even a lick of understanding what autism was like for somebody until I met a 15-year-old learner and was really able, because she was very hard to build rapport with. She was
Right,
also a teenager and still is. She love her to death though.
right,
And teenagers are just a little challenging, diagnosis or not. But I think kind of to answer your question and like a little bit of I'm going to go off on a tangent and loop back around. A lot
no
of
worries.
what helped me understand her was taking the time to listen and observe her. And I think that kind of goes back to compassionate care,
Mhm,
and just taking off my professional hat. I feel
right,
like I that's one of the things that I have been well equipped with as a, young BCBA myself as well. I'm not even certified for 2 years yet. That will happen next January. But just taking off your professional hat for a minute and being a person and just setting all of that stuff aside and just really seeking to understand the individual. And
right,
so I think, maybe it's challenging for people who offer counseling and psychotherapy services. It's challenging for them to take on somebody with autism if they haven't worked with anybody, because they don't maybe like, yeah, we hear
very
about
true.
special interests and hyperfixation, but do you really know what that means until you,
Mm,
encounter somebody with autism? I have a
mhm,
learner, we both like bugs, but like that's his special interest is bugs. So I will talk
mm,
about bugs, but like he will talk about bugs. So if you bring
right,
it up, that's going to be the topic of like the ongoing conversation for until he's satisfied. And I understand that because I have experience, but maybe somebody who's a counselor might not quite get it. So
right,
maybe what we could do is find a way to better educate, the counselors and stuff out there on
right,
what it's like to work with people who have autism, and empower, those individuals to be able to find their voice and express their needs. But that also falls in the lap of the, psychotherapists and counselors to allow for that space, which again goes back
right.
to compassionate care.
Exactly. No, you make a really good point there. I don't know if this next question kind of wraps back around to it, but I'm wondering because I'm still trying to figure this out myself, but I wonder if there's any misconceptions that therapists commonly have about autism that can hinder effective, psychology sessions because I know in today's society, there's a lot of misconceptions about autism, and it's like I'm wondering if you have heard of any of them that could potentially make it difficult for autistic people to have a very successful and or what's the word I'm looking for? Daniel, I might need your help with this
Um,
one.
Enriching, experience.
There we go. Thank you. Yeah, that's what I was trying to get at. I mean, my brain's still a little tired from yesterday's activities, so um have you heard of any misconceptions about autism that could potentially bring down a very successful session,
Yeah,
if that makes
no,
sense?
yeah, no, I understand exactly what you're trying to ask.
Mm,
Um, I think kind of goes back to, individuals who only look at the DSM-5 diagnostic criteria,
mhm.
that could be a misconception in itself. I'm going to take a drink of water real quick.
No worries.
Just have
Oh,
a tickle in my throat, so I'm not coughing in my microphone. But could be a misconception in itself because it offers us a very baseline, right,
Right.
criteria of how somebody might be affected or display symptoms of autism, but again, every individual is different.
Okay.
As far as anything that would specifically, I guess I'm having like a hard time answering it.
No worries.
Excuse me, but I do know, the conversation kind of made me think of social media and like the younger, like I'm young, but younger than me generation who are popping off with like, oh, I have autism because I do this.
Right.
Without like an exact diagnosis. So I don't know if we want to dive into that conversation, but that could be the best example I think of is oh, I'm weird, I'm quirky, I have autism. But I don't know if somebody who is an adult and be in a professional setting would have the same, way of thinking.
Right. No, that's a good answer. I appreciate that. So Daniel, I know you said you said bachelor's, right?
Yeah, I've got my bachelor's in psychology and my master's in ABA.
Okay, perfect. This will be a question for both of you. What do you think can be successful in terms of tools and techniques that therapists and psychologists can use to identify and respect an autistic person's boundaries? Because usually most autistic people that I've talked to, when I brought up about psychology and stuff, they said that their boundaries weren't respected. So I'm just trying to figure out how can therapists, you know, identify their boundaries and respect them, because it's like for psychology, and this is kind of like a special interest of mine, but it's like, how can we identify their boundaries and make sure we don't cross them? Because I've already had experiences with that, and for any psychologist who watches this, I really wanted this episode to happen to really help you out as well, especially if you have an autistic client. And I really want you to understand that some sessions may not be as beneficial or impactful as others. And which is why I'm asking about the whole, how can they respect our boundaries?
Yeah, you know what? I think it's definitely the right question to be asking. And a lot of people struggle with this both within our field and outside of it in psychology, because we're given instructions that we do on a daily basis, hourly basis, say, this is our job, we do this, right? But what we often forget after the paperwork is signed and after everybody has supposedly read all the things that we're going to do, and maybe they read it and you even talked over it, but you guys were busy and that kind of went in one ear and out the other. Who knows what happened? It's important to always ask, is this okay? Are you okay with blank, right? And I know that sounds simple, but it's an important thing to do, because a lot of people have this assumption about ABA and also about therapy options for autistic people all over the place, that their control, their autonomy is not going to be recognized. They're not going to necessarily be able to not have something occur that they want to escape from, right? And a lot of times it's going to be, okay, this is a great thing to focus on now. How can we tolerate this further? And that is sometimes very much just the wrong way to go about things. You should start by getting informed consent from not just the people around, but this individual that you are working with. And you need to ask them on a daily basis, not monthly or biannually, for for a good
Or at least like do a check-in once every other day or every 3 days or something like that.
Yeah, I have a student, for instance, always Thursdays end up being like the worst day. And, everybody's so busy on Thursday and things always end up happening. And you always have the choice, right? Whether or not you
Right.
want to engage in therapy or not. And we need to start remembering to check more frequently, whether it's an autistic client, a student who just, is asking a teacher for help in tutoring, or,
Right.
maybe just talking to somebody who needs your help in real life, right? We always need to remember to take that second, say, is it okay for us to
Right.
talk about this right now? Or what? Is that actually going to make you more uncomfortable than you're already feeling? If
Right.
that's the case, let's wait till later. We all know how to uh, de-escalate and debrief in ABA, but for humans, right, we need
Right.
to be able to give each other space, and we all kind of know that as well, and are taught to respect each other's boundaries without saying so. Though,
Right.
let's remember, it's important to establish and say those unspoken things with students, especially autistic students, right? Sometimes
Right.
it's not just assumed that you're going to be a nice guy or you're going to be like respectful of their boundaries. Maybe they just had the therapist or the barber who is not so nice when they are
Right.
moving away from them or trying not to engage with stimuli they find aversive or overbearing and overstimulating. And then they come into your session and you think, oh
Yeah.
well, last one went well, and you
Hmm.
act a certain way. But we got to remember, everybody's not only is everyone different, everyone's day is going differently, and we need to make sure that all of our work, all of our thinking about how we're going to help this person meets them at the appropriate time, as well
Right.
as you know in the appropriate moment of the day, right? So sometimes it's just not a good day for them. Sometimes it's just, okay, you know what? We've been doing so much right now that this is just not you've already accomplished enough, right? For
Right.
instance,
Right.
Art, you are accomplished so much this week, and now we're recording the podcast, and I
Yeah.
feel bad almost like you're like super exhausted, but I'm just so appreciative that you spend your weekend doing this with me, because
Yeah.
honestly, like, it just goes to show how unwavering your advocacy can be sometimes, and how much you deserve that Advocate of the Year award and
I
all
appreciate
these
it.
many nominations. By the way, wait, how many nominations was it for the Advocate of the Year award?
They said that there was, on my end, there was about 15 people that nominated me. And then, but there was about 18 to, I believe, I'm not entirely sure on the numbers, so don't quote me on this, but I guess there was like 18 to 20 different people that were nominated. And so this was the most nominations they've received in their 26 years.
Wow.
Wow, and again, it's just so incredible. But for you, I know that the weight of all those nominations, I think it kind of made you a little more nervous than
Oh
you would have.
yeah. Oh, absolutely. No, that was a mess. I was an anxious mess. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and then luckily, right? What happened is, like, they helped you with your slides, because these slides weren't working, and they were like, "Oh my gosh, like, we gotta."
Oh yeah, that was awful.
That must have been terrifying. And of course, right, there's at least somebody there to make sure that you felt okay, to help you with the slides, which, I'm very grateful to whoever that was. Thanks for being a friend and, helping out with the presentation. Um,
Yeah.
that's like a nightmare of mine, right? Like that commercial where the guy is plugging in his Zoom slides, and then all of a sudden it's like his vacation pictures on the laptop,
Oh
or something.
yeah. No, I
They
remember
unplug
that.
the computer, and he's like, "Get out."
Yeah.
That's like my worst nightmare. But we don't ever want to feel like, oh my gosh, like we're really being put on the spot right now. Nobody does. And even if you've
Right.
had a good thing happen to you, and this is all a great thing, and you can easily turn that into potentially a terrifying experience really
Yeah.
fast, putting somebody on the spot and not asking if they're okay to do whatever you want them to do. And we just need to make adjustments, right? I think that's also important to note. People sometimes they won't ask, is this okay with you if I do this?
Right.
Or are you okay? Because they don't want someone to say, I'm not okay. And this is not okay with me. And you know what? Sometimes you've got to give people the space to say, this is not okay with me, and honor that
Right.
completely. If you're going to let them say this is not okay with me and then do it anyways, then just don't ask also. Like, and also just stop doing what you're doing and, go home and have session later, I think, because it just doesn't seem the time to learn that when somebody is not happy, relaxed, and engaged, like we always talk about. And it's not going to be conducive to their learning. The environment is not going to be enriched. And like we talked about earlier, successful session can go really good to really bad, really fast, right? I know that sometimes we get excited too as healthcare providers. Everybody's excited when the person they're trying to help shows like the least bit of progress, and sometimes
Right.
start to expect the moon. But remember, it's one small jump at a time. Nobody's asking anybody to take all the steps in the staircase in one bound, one leap, right? That wouldn't make any sense. And even though there are motivators coming from all different directions, there's sometimes financial people who want there to be something consistently going on. There's sometimes caregivers who want something to be enforced that the student really doesn't like. Or there's sometimes teachers who need to do something for a class full of people that doesn't necessarily apply to this one specific person, to give a few examples. And how do we solve all those problems?
Yeah.
Is just by asking on a daily basis, are you okay? Is this okay with you if we continue with this? And if not, really, really respecting that boundary, regardless of the consequences. And sometimes that is just something that we forget as clinicians, because we're assigned a job to do and we want to fulfill that. But never is that more important than the comfort of the people we serve.
Exactly. That's a really good answer. And I think the biggest issue when trying to figure out a person or an autistic person's boundaries is kind of asking them, only because with our brain we're trying to let them know what our boundaries are, but our brain gets frustrated, which causes these issues that happen, like getting upset with the therapist and the therapist calling, security or police on us. I mean, that's happened before, and I've saw that, and it's like, this question will go to you, Brice, now, but what do you think? And this could also be from your BCBA perspective. What tool or technique can they use to help really get the to really understand the autistic person's boundaries so they don't cross that?
Yeah. That it kind of makes me sad to hear that you have heard of, well, it doesn't kind of, makes me really sad to hear that there's examples of, autistic individuals trying to seek help and, from a counselor, and then having the really poor consequence of, the police being called on them because of a misunderstanding. I think having this conversation, I've had a lot more questions than answers. So I would love to learn more just about the impacts. Maybe we can have that conversation another time, Martin. But to answer your question, I think that goes back to assent and learning assent withdrawal. And I'll be honest, I don't think I've ever had, I've been in counseling ever since I was really young, actually, kind of off and on. I've definitely used it as a tool when I've hit a really hard spot in my life. And, for various reasons, I don't know if I've ever had a counselor even ask me as a, if I'm okay with something. When you guys were talking about crossing those boundaries, Martin, I was thinking of There was this, and he was in his, he was in grad school learning, so forgive him, right? But there was this Colorado State University, in Fort Collins, Colorado, which is really cool, has this program where the students are able to provide counseling services to other students there, right? So counseling students are able to provide counseling services. And so I utilized that because I was just going through a rough time. And one of the individuals was making it their goal to make me cry during the session, not to in a mean way, but I have a hard time crying in front of people. And I prefaced that was my boundary of, you might see that I need to cry, but I'm going to hold it in, and that's just what I need to do. I know this is the safe space. Yes, yeah, it's a safe space. I know I can cry here. It just may not happen because that's just my boundary. And he's like, it's okay to cry, Brice. It's okay to cry. You need to let yourself cry. And in my brain, I was like, bro, that is not what I'm trying to do right now. I'm trying to get out my words. So I can only imagine how you feel, maybe not or other individuals, maybe not quite having the words, or, if you are nonverbal, or if just your way of communicating and your way of letting know what your boundaries are different than probably what most counselors have seen, and that's probably why those boundaries have been crossed. So to loop back around to answering your question, I think knowing that you're working with an individual who likely isn't going to appear in the same way as maybe a neurotypical or, neurotypical presenting individual might be able to let you know when their boundaries have been crossed, really watching, right? So kind of like our conversation at the beginning, with my rats, if I grab one of my rats and I'm kissing their cute little face, they'll scrunch away from me and try to get away. And that's their way of telling me that they don't like that.
Interesting.
And I know that, right? And I know that sign. And so I think that's a pretty clear sign. It's just a matter of me stopping what I'm doing, making sure I'm recognizing the sign, and actually following through, with not crossing my rat's boundaries.
Right.
Maybe just kind of how we were talking about checking in and just watching the individual, really observing. And it may not happen within the first couple sessions in the most perfect way, because you're still learning each other, you're building that relationship, that trust, but hopefully over time of the counselor just kind of really seeking to understand, that will become clear, and you guys will eventually build that trust and rapport and the safe space of, okay, cool, I'm crossing a boundary, right? Because your guys' threshold for emotions are way different than, for example, what I experience. And so something might be more triggering to you than a quote neurotypical person.
True. Okay. No, that's a really good answer. And, I'm learning something new every day which is why I kind of want to ask these questions, because I really want to understand from a different person's perspective. And, instead of just being about me, it's I really am grateful that you answered the way you did, because I had no idea about that. And it's definitely helping me understand everything better. So I appreciate it. And so we got a couple questions left. These are kind of the more important ones. And this could be for either you or Daniel. How do you think, or how can, psychology therapy help us autistics develop coping strategies for managing societal expectations and pressures? Because that's one of the biggest things that an autistic like me struggles with. And it's I try to fit in with society, but I have to mask a whole lot, and sometimes it takes a toll. And so I'd really like to know how that can help someone like me in managing that, because it's not easy. I'm gonna admit it's not easy at all.
from my bachelor level understanding of psychology, a very, very innate way of desensitizing systematically that fear that we all maybe have with expressing our more vulnerable aspects in life. Maybe you guys have been there in other situations yourself. Listeners, feel free to comment if you've ever felt the same way and share your stories. Because again, I think that's another thing that we need to make sure is prioritized above all else. And something that your advocacy does wonderfully, Martin, is just encourage people to share their stories. If you're a therapist and you're not going to get somebody to cry in front of you, you're not going to get them to do their most deepest, darkest secret right now, but you're open to listening to them sharing. It could be about anything. I mean, kids are sharing with me about things I'd never even heard of that the Gen Z talk about. And then there's old people, they share about things that existed long before I was ever born and nobody's talked about in 20 years. But I listen and I care deeply about all that stuff because it's important to them, right? And when you find, again, empathy in another person. We talked about how it throws a surge of dopamine into your brain. You actually feel very rewarded automatically by having somebody understand you. The best thing that you can do is then, continue to engage in the way that allowed you to do that going forward. So if you needed the Nintendo Switch to do that, then keep going with it, right? If you needed the music therapy to bring out the benefit in a therapeutic environment, then try that for a while. Or if it's just something totally, the unrelated that you never thought of, going to a particular park, going to a particular setting for engagements in services, having the outside air and the walls away from you, so you're not boxed in. For instance, it doesn't have to be that person or just therapy in general, but if you're a healthcare provider, you owe it to your patient to find out what makes them uncomfortable and to not have that present in their environment as much as you can, as much as you're trying to also imbue any things they don't like with things that are okay in their view, that are special, that are enjoyable. I don't know why I'm trying to open up a gift or something like that, but the lollipops. If the doctors never had the lollipops, would the kids go? And Mary Poppins says a spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down, and it's not for no reason, right? It's because medicine, we don't want to take it, we're afraid it's going to taste bad, and we need the sugar to accompany it, right? So be the sugar, right? Build the rapport. I think all the things we talked about today would make me want to assent to something and verbally provide my consent since I'm able, and tell a practitioner I'm okay with this. Make sure you know the treatment history. And if it's from provider to provider, therapy to different therapists over and over and over and over and over, then you can probably put together that it wasn't working for a reason, and you're going to have to start somewhere with a little bit of a little offering of peace in a way, right? To break it up, mix it up. Please be that person, right? Who offers sugar first, without quid pro quo, in non-contingent reinforcement schedules, I might add. Which I think that might bring me to a question I really wanted to ask alongside with this. How have you experienced maybe burnout in your own career, Brice, as you've been getting this promotion? Because I know that non-contingent reinforcement was pivotal in me to be able to continue past my second year. I'm now in my third, almost fourth year as a behavior analyst, and without being able to, like I said earlier, I don't know, engage with my students with like Pokemon and Digimon and all those things I enjoyed when I was a kid, and then further learn their interests, right, and know how important that is. I'm not sure what kind of environment I would be able to create for myself and how I might be able to avoid burnout. And I'm wondering if you might feel the same way.
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. My promotion has only been in effect for it'll be 2 weeks tomorrow. So I haven't quite met any burnout related to this role just yet. However, I have already met burnout in, my career as an analyst. And I think part of it was due to just the one company that I do work for is all in home services. And the Colorado Springs region is just a little weird. As far as services go, there's a lot of services out there and there's a big need. But I think it's there's just I think it's so saturated out there with all these different services that it's hard to get those daytime clients to meet your billable requirement. So a lot of my clients were in the evening 4 to 6, but also TRICARE, which you can only bill 2 hours for. So how am I supposed to meet 25 billables with only 10 hours worth of clients and, trying? And I was doing a lot of extra work. I was assisting with marketing to try to, get clients. I was telling my regional coordinator at the time, like, hey, I need the clients, right? Because I'm not hitting my billables. I'm dedicated. What can I do? So I was working at 2 different companies for a little bit, and that was exhausting. Not because I was working at 2 different companies, but because I was servicing a lot of clients, right? So the first level of burnout that I experienced was trying to meet my billables, having that stress of trying, because I have that internal guilt of making sure that I'm doing a good job and doing what I need to do. The second level of burnout was a big client caseload. It was a lot to manage. I think together it was about 20 clients between the two, and it was just a lot. And I felt like, I went from having a small caseload, being able to be so personalized with my clients, to I feel like I can't really supervise and update programs. And I felt like I was always on my computer because I was like, this is my time to update programs. The third level of burnout that I experienced, unfortunately, was just some interpersonal challenges. And I would say that's, for me, everybody gets burnt out by different things. For me, anytime you have somebody who's supposed to be in a leadership position who is not ethical, who's not kind, who is just making you feel awful every time you go into work. I didn't want to show up to work. There was times where I cried and I was like, I'm in debt, so it's a little too late now, but is this the right field for me? And I was every day looking at different companies to go to. I was like, man, can I do anything else with my BCBA besides work and clinical ABA? And what can I do? I was like, do I need to go back to school? I was just so desperate.
We all think about that stuff in the field, especially in recent events.
Yes.
Don't feel like you're alone in any way. I know countless BCBAs who they experience the same things. And I do want to add, those 3 levels of burnout, I'm very glad that you defined them. If you, do you feel that if you were to start out with these roles and, a lot of times they don't necessarily ask us if it's okay when we are taking on like all the cases that we take on at once. Do you feel like maybe if they asked you if you're okay, it would have been a little bit more sustainable for you to hold up with, that those previous caseloads? Or do you feel like potentially, it still is too much, right? There needs to go a step beyond, where it's not only do we ask if they're okay with it, but we also try to avoid these 3 things that typically cause PCBAs to burn out.
Yeah, I think that would be wonderful. And maybe that's why, yes, early in my promotional job, right? But also my regional coordinator now, she's very wonderful. And anytime that she teaches me something new or adds something onto my plate, she always expresses, sometimes there are those needs when you're in a leadership position you just have to pivot and you have to get something done. And that's just the name of the game. But she always makes it clear, like, hey, if it aligns for me to send you an email email at 9 o'clock at night. That's because that's just the time that works best for me. She has kids, right? Please don't feel like you have to be on your computer at 9 o'clock at night responding and doing this work. I'm just getting the email out so you know what you can do tomorrow. But we have that open communication of like, you're doing great, or, how are you feeling? How's everything going? And I think had I had that as I was a new BCBA, because keep in mind too, right? 2 years is not yet for me. So that was my whole first year experience as a BCBA. I feel like I got what every BCBA gets in maybe 5 years in my first year.
Oh yeah, you know what? I mean, it was a crazy year. I don't know. I think you and me are like, we started like around COVID time, and like we like exploded then or something, and then our brains exploded pretty much, and now we're living with like a quarter brain that's left, reorganizing all our ABA knowledge to take over the rest of our skull, and that's just the way it goes. We all feel that way, right? As BCBAs, I want everybody to hear me on this. It's not just you. And don't feel bad about thinking about it and thinking about, oh, do I need to advocate for myself here or there? Here's the real thing. When you find an employer in a position that allows you to advocate yourself freely and allows you to advocate for yourself honestly, without fear of repercussions, without any fear that this is going to make you think that I'm somehow, a problem to work with or something like that, because I felt that I needed this and that, right, as a benefit or something like that, or I needed extra PTO or something like that. Then that is definitely a sign that maybe you do need to look elsewhere for routes, or talk to someone else, perhaps in HR, maybe someone outside of this person that you generally talk to at your employer, in order to access those benefits. And it's not something to be ashamed of, but you need that non-contingent reinforcement in your environment. It just simply comes down to that. So if you feel comfortable, great. If you don't feel comfortable, then
totally understandable.
Say so. Yeah, it's understandable. Say so, and tell people that you feel comfortable telling, right? You don't have to feel so uncomfortable that you have to tell the person that makes you feel the most uncomfortable that you feel uncomfortable, because that is again, it's going to give you the two bad impressions. I don't even think this person, knows what they're doing, and I don't even think they like me. I think they don't. It's not going to go well. So please don't balloon that. My video chat app is sending the wrong message, and I really should give that a thumbs down if I possibly can. But we're gonna run out of time here, Martin. I know you want to get in.
I know I was supposed to ask one more question, but you guys, and I know we're almost out of time, but I just wanted to add one more question before the last one, if that's okay with you both. And this goes back to the whole burnout. And so how should therapists address the issues of burnout with autistic clients? Because I know burnout's one of the more difficult topics, because therapists themselves could get burnt out as well. So Brice, as a therapist who, after hearing about the different levels of burnout, how should they address that? Because for me, I can't tell if I ever am in burnout, because my brain and my body really aren't connected. And so people say that I may look like it, but my brain thinks, oh yeah, no, I'm totally fine. And so, yeah, after you shared about your burnout, what do you think therapists can do to address it?
Yeah. I think it's different for every person, right? Because my burnout story was way different than yours just now. You were saying, well, on the outside, people think that I might look burnt out, but in reality, I feel great, right? Like you expressed that you had a very busy week, a very busy weekend. I know I would have felt burnt out because my weekends are sacred to me and I need to do very minimal. And I'm not sure how you're feeling, if you're feeling burnt out or if you're like, no, I'm energized. I feel great.
It's hard to tell though, because it's like for me, since my brain and my body really can't connect with each other, it's hard to tell. And it's like, I mean, I could potentially feel it, but my brain is like, oh no, everything's totally okay. But it's like, how do I address that issue? You know, like, or even for like therapists who go through it, like, how did you address burnout?
No, and maybe, in your case, right? Again, I'm not an expert, but, even if I was talking to you as a friend, I would maybe recommend some ways to kind of help you recognize those feelings. Like, how does your body feel? When you have a really long week, do you end up having a meltdown after because maybe you were burnt out or you were having, some feelings of exhaustion, and then you have a meltdown because your body is just like,
Right.
um, for me, I consulted with some of my trusted people that were also in leadership positions, and just my, BCBA friends that have been BCBAs longer, and just kind of sought some advice. What was your experience? What is this? And, I had one BCBA friend tell me, yeah, you're burnt out. And I was like, but I've only been certified for a year.
Oh,
Well,
you
Right.
how is that possible? Because I'm like I'm young and my
Right.
certification is young and the world is my oyster. And then I felt like I was just slapped down, but I still love this field so much. Otherwise I wouldn't be sitting here with you today.
Right.
So I think after I identified that that is what was going on, I did start making changes for myself. So I left that one company where I wasn't having very good interpersonal experiences, with the leadership. And I, just kind of advocated that I think I need to work one job, and I made that happen. And I started making time more to do things that I enjoy, because I think that was part of it too, was I wasn't getting to enjoy my weekends because I was trying to just do so much to make up billables with clients. So even now in a leadership position, I make sure my job is done and I make sure I'm doing the stuff that I need to do. However, if I step away to go take a 30-minute walk, I think
Right.
that's okay. And I don't think anything's going to catch on fire.
Right.
And I go do that for myself. It's important. I, ride my bike to a coffee shop and do work there, because it's a hybrid job. So I might be doing some
Right.
stuff at home. I might be going to see clients. So I think part of it really fell on me, is once I got into a good spot, I really, really tried hard to create space to do the things that I needed to do to feel okay.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to add on that just like a
Okay.
little bit too, because
No
I
worries.
noticed that before we got on today, I was talking to Martin and I was like, gee, I feel like he's probably going to be tired because he's been working
But my
seven
body
days.
doesn't feel like it, or my brain doesn't think that I'm tired, even though I may look tired. So it's like it's a weird circumstance, but yeah.
And then you totally like insisted, right? And I think, right, I think it's important because otherwise, right, we wouldn't even be recording for this episode if he hadn't insisted, because we were kind of running a little late and we are getting all this together and we wanted to make sure that we got this one right. And again,
Correct.
thank you so much for joining us, Brice, even though we adjusted a little bit earlier. But if Martin hadn't insisted, I would want him to take the break, right? And as
Yeah. No, you're right.
right, as the person providing the service a lot of times, or the person who is just being there to be a confidant for someone else, right? maybe
Right.
you maybe you want to make that decision really quick that we're not going to do this today unless you insist, right, that we do it. And I
Right.
think that that's an important way to get consent, and also to see somebody's assent, like they really want to. Maybe they might say, no, no, okay, like I still think, yeah, let's do it, whatever,
Yeah.
gosh. Then actually, no, we're not going to do it, because it just sounds like it's going to burn this person out. And that is a
Right.
huge risk, right? And I don't want to ever be the guy who burns you out, Martin.
Nah,
And
yeah, no, no, you're totally fine,
yeah,
and
and I think it's important to acknowledge here, it's like, Martin and I, we don't work at the same company or anything, but we're good friends. And I think you should think of a lot of things when you are working employee relations area of your life, or the client relations area of your life, or public relations, even sometimes when you're posting things out there, to treat whoever
Right.
you're interacting with. It's hard to say, oh, treat them as you want to be treated all the time, because everyone's different, but treat them as though they were your really close friend. And would you really want to be the person who is going to do this to them right now, or be the one who engages in this way right now? And
Right.
if not, in this case, right, I could tell Martin he's my friend, and this episode means a lot to him. He wants to do it. Like, we're gonna do it, even though we're both like
Right.
crawling out here. And Brice, I know you mentioned you're a little tired as well and slightly under the weather today. So again, we're all just feeling like, oh, we insisted today, but could we have rescheduled? Yes. And I think that's one of the most important things in ABA.
Yeah.
Even though we said we're not going to talk about ABA, but in psychology as well, let's just say in all therapy that you're engaging with that is not there to sustain your biological functions another day for living purposes, right?
Right.
It's important to acknowledge that we always have a choice, right? And sometimes as that provider, if you think that risk is higher than the reward of therapy for that day, then just make that call. We're not going to do it today unless you're really, really not okay with us not having a session, right? And people will tell you not to do that, but that's okay to say, because sometimes already, like, they're going to chug along and they're going to say yes just for me to be happy, whether they want to or not. Sometimes you gotta just throw that extra little tester in there. Like, actually, well, I feel like it's my choice that we're not going to do it today. Was that okay with you? And maybe that's the best way to ask if it's okay sometimes, right? In a sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Deductive way rather than an inductive way. Ask if is that okay with you if you don't do this?
Right.
Perhaps it's not, but perhaps it is. And if you're asking them, it's most likely that it probably is probably the case that it's okay if you don't do whatever you're about to do that day, and reschedule the next day or the next week or whenever that person is feeling healthy, happy, relaxed, and engaged. I want to add that healthy part in there, because sometimes people forget, right? Oh, I was sick yesterday, but I'm feeling halfway today. Let's have session. That's a good time to ask them again. We're not going to have it unless you really, really think like you're all better and you don't want to miss another day. That would be the worst thing ever for you. We're not going to do it. And that's what we should be doing. I know it's ethically compliant to be that way, but it's easy to forget, right? Especially when there's lots to do. There's lots of expectations to meet. You got to talk to some person you don't like about it and explain it to them. You don't want any of those things in your environment. You want to make sure that you advocate for yourself to be able to make decisions with psychological safety in a clinical manner, right, as well as a mental health personal manner for your own sake. So it goes both ways.
Definitely. And I know we are slightly over time. I just have this one last question, because I feel like I have to end it with this one, because I know, mental health is so important, with everything going on. So my last question before we get on to anything amazing you'd like to share, Brice, what or how important is it to focus on the mental health in therapy, like from a psychology standpoint, or like any therapy in general? Because I know mental health can be tough to talk about at times, but the reason why I wanted to end it with this question is it's not really, or the importance of mental health really isn't talked about enough. And so I kind of wanted to ask you your thoughts on that.
I think, you are right. It's emerging, but there are some areas where mental health can't be recognized. In my opinion, counseling, that's what it's there for, is to help you address your mental health and, those needs. And I think it's, what that looks like is different for each person. And I think that goes back to what Dan was saying about, if today is not the day, like just because you feel a little bit better than you did before, doesn't mean that you have to continue with therapy. I think that's
Right.
something that, we can do better in ABA is, yeah,
Right.
we have billables to meet. However, if our client isn't doing very well, right, quality over quantity, I would rather my learner to rest and get better than to bug them with ABA today.
Gotcha.
um, and I think that's really important. And back to our discussion of burnout, it's what we do. We're in a very helping field, and we can have compassion fatigue, and we can just have overall fatigue because we're doing a lot. And I think it's really important for us to also recognize when we need breaks as well. So I know you were asking specifically for counseling, but I think, answering it in other areas, just
Right.
because I believe like that's what counseling's there for. It's to help you address what you need, help with in terms of mental health, any other life problems. If you need to talk about past traumas and, whatever it is, like that's what those people are there for.
Right.
And so I think it's such a wonderful thing, just by having my experience with the guy that wanted me to cry in the session.
Right.
I've still had so many other great experiences, and people have helped me through some really tough times and made me get back on, my feet again. And that's what it's there for. And I know a lot of people have poor experiences with it. And it sounds like especially the autistic community. So hopefully that can change.
Exactly. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, and I'm really, really hope that we as a society feels more comfortable to talk about that.
Yes.
For sure. Definitely. Wow. Daniel, what an episode it's been today. I know I may have looked a little tired, but I really felt grateful for Brice hopping on and talking about this. And I know I should have told this in the beginning, but what was it? I know we're not talking about it from like a professional
Oh,
standpoint.
yeah. Well, you know what? You totally reminded me. I got you. So a lot of you guys may be a little bit sad that we did have to postpone the U.S. Autism Show from this year in November to April 2025. Though we're very excited to have, a lot of presenters and people interested in it, and we want to make sure that it's the biggest and best representation of our wonderful community here in the United States and a little bit beyond as well, if you've seen our list of presenters, so that we can provide a really fun, engaging experience for all the guests as well, too. So we're going to be coming back in April, and we'd love to have anybody who wants to participate is still welcome to contact us, reach out to us, DM, comment, send us your email, and we will queue you up. We will be coming back, so keep an eye out in, the turn of the year after New Year's for our announcements about when we will be doing the new date, still TBD. Just to bring it back to what we're talking about, remember to be that sugar, right? Remember to be the thing that makes the medicine go down, right? And remember that sometimes, even though we're ABA clinicians, they still think of us as therapists. And I say they, what I mean is really everybody who's not in ABA, right, doesn't think of like, this is a technician or an analyst or an assistant analyst or whatever, right? They think this is a therapist. This is a person from psychology. Psychologists know that we're not psychologists. We know that we're not psychologists. But does everybody perceive us differently? No, not really. I mean, they might just think that behavior analysts, we're just the most boring type of psychologist. That makes perfect sense to me. But the best parts of being a healthcare provider in any sense, you could be anybody, is when you really feel like you're there for that person. And even if you're not a therapist, you felt like a therapist, right? Because you had that interaction where you treated that person with the golden rule, or you treated them even though they're not your friend in real life and you've never crossed that boundary, you never would. You treated them like you would potentially treat someone that you care deeply about just because it was the right thing to do. And that is why we're all here. That's part of the reason why we avoid burnout as well, I think. When we have that opportunity and somebody tells us, hey, that's not really part of your whole shtick, right? But that meant a lot to me. And you're saying, oh, wow, you know what? Good thing I was here then. I'm the man, or I'm the woman, or I'm the hero of the day, or the winner, or whatever is what you say when you're like, good job, self. So pat yourself on the back. There it is. I almost forgot this episode. That would have been awful. Right. And yeah, before we go, Brice, did you have anything that you want to raise awareness for? Anything cool going on? Anything to look out for?
No, but just tell everybody to keep on keeping on. And I think my favorite quote from this episode is just be the sugar.
Be the sugar. Yeah, definitely. And keep on keeping on. And yeah, we will see you guys in our next episode. And we'll announce the guests as soon as we get confirmation. But thank you for waiting while we're on our short break. We're excited to come out with a great season 2 for you guys. So stay tuned, and thank you again for listening.
Awesome. Bye, everyone. Thank you again for stopping on, Brice.
Thanks for having me.